I would say two, maybe three major points from the last meeting. One of them was obviously drainage. So what we've done since the last meeting is we've gone out, my survey team has gone out and located the existing drainage in and around the area of the proposed cul-de-sac. A little hard to see on the from there, but we can show you the plan. I think you guys have these. There's an existing, we should call it almost like a property walk in there. It's just a couple of bricks put together. That has two inlet pipes coming from each side. It's in the swale area of the west side of Old Worcester Road, off the pavement. The two pipes that are entering don't seem to daylight anywhere along the swale, but they definitely were bringing in water. This is a dry day. I was out there last Friday. Yeah, last Friday. And so my guess would be there's definitely some groundwater coming in, and probably a lot of leaf cover here, so there's probably some additional water. Definitely a country drainage situation. There's also an inlet to the northeast, approximately in this area, same kind of inlet basin. This pipe seemed to want to go in this direction. Seemed like this pipe was coming in here, but definitely couldn't tell for sure. That would be my best guess. And then we outletted to the east, across Old Worcester, to a drain manhole, which we opened and took a look at, and then continued to go east, down past the houses, down into the lower lying area. With that, we chased that to take a look at the second issue, which was on concern of drying that up. And from the investigation, we found that outlet definitely contributed, but there was also three others. There was one, so here's the cul-de-sac road. It was definitely the one that went across. Two houses over, there was another outlet in the back of that person's yard. Luckily, that homeowner was home. He invited me onto the property and showed me the pipe. It was long, there was water coming out. Could not find anything back upstream connected. And then, of course, there is the third culvert just to the on this plan to the west of L Turner Road, which is a larger pipe that was definitely flowing as a wetland system there. Upon investigation, it turns out that all three of those kind of converge, go under Hammer Rock Road and feed back. So we're probably messing with a third of the total inflow to that pump. So with that said, and based on our drainage calcs, there was a number thrown around last time, and I think it was just an off-the-cuff number, so I want to dispel that. What I looked at was the volumes of the 210 and 100-year storm. The volume is the amount of water. So my thought is as long as the relatively same amount of water is getting there, we're not going to dry up the pond, especially since we're going to be dripping to roughly, for ease of our discussion, a third of the drainage area. I think our biggest, I'm going to go off the top of my head, I think the biggest reductions in the 2 years was about an 18% reduction, and as the storms got bigger, it was a less reduction. One was 10 and the other was 12. So we did take a look at trying to increase those. It got a little hairy once we tried to get too close, and we weren't able to maintain our reduction in either a peak or a volume in all the storms. Much beyond that, so I feel like we got as tight as we could in terms of still meeting the bylaw, but also taking into account not drying up that pond. Again, the drainage system on site stayed the same. The outlet on our property discharges through a level spreader and maintains natural drainage course. And then the third issue was some additional information on the pump and the pump system and the generator. We submitted that. I think it's been commented on. We did submit some general pump calcs. We did specify a generic pump or a possible pump, and we did call out propane tank to be the fuel source for the generator if electricity was to come. So I think those are the major points. I know there was a letter issued today, which I did read, but I'm not going to assume they did because they came up late. We happy to turn it over to the board. Any questions? Or go from there. That sums up the 3 points.
I'm going to let Mike go through
Okay, thank you. So we did issue a letter earlier today, and that was a result of some back and forth and additional information that I requested that came in this morning. So that had to do to the time of the letter. As Mr. Novak talked about, we did meet on the Friday after the last planning board meeting on the site plan. Out at the site, we looked at the drainage issues on Old Worcester Road, in between the properties. That was reported by some of the residents. And down on Mr. Moore's property with the pond, as Mr. Novak stated, we identified that pond in particular is fed by 3 distinct areas and culverts across Old Worcester Road. And the project as it's designed now with the stormwater management system, again, it's slowing the rate down, but mostly approximating the volume of water. So the same amount of water is approximately the same amount of water is getting to that pond as it does now as a result of this project being developed, just at a slower rate. And again, it's only a portion of the drainage area that feeds that pond, so in my opinion, the project shouldn't affect that pond.
Yeah.
And the issue of the existing culvert across the road that does collect runoff from both Old Worcester Road and from the site. That isn't going to change with the project. But again, the stormwater management system that's proposed will attenuate those flows so that culvert won't see any increase in runoff through it. So I did, if you have my letter, there's a color map at the back that I attempted to put together to kind of show where all these various culverts are, and the approximate path of flow from them down all the way through, to and through Mr. Moore's property, 15 Hammer Road. So that'll clarify what we're talking about here. And Mr. Novak also mentioned about pump calculations. Those were submitted. They're preliminary, I would say, but they give a general feel as far as what will be required here. I still maintain that the board could include as a condition, if they wished, that the final design for those pumps should come prior to construction in the form of like a typical submittal shop drawing process that you would see for equipment like that. That would be an acceptable condition. They did submit a revised O&M plan that included the proposed pump system and generator systems. So that was taken care of, and they provided the final item that they provided some more information on the proposed storm tech system and the design with the concrete pad. As far as I'm concerned, at this point, they've addressed my outstanding concerns. Certainly go into more detail. You probably haven't had a chance to look at my letter yet, but if you want to talk about anything more, we can at this point.
Do we have specific questions of the board yet? No, we haven't had a chance to digest everything. Do we want to open it up to the public to make comments while we So I'm going to open it up to the audience. Keep your questions and comments focused on the definitive subdivision plan, please. State your name and your address. And
Good evening. My name is Ed Korsling. I'm at 47 Hanson Road, Charlton. As you know, I've been looking at these plans, and I was the one who pointed out at the last meeting that they missed a bunch of things, like the catch basins, which was very significant. And then obviously there was a new plan that was submitted last week. I have reviewed that. I did send it, you guys an email this morning regarding that. Hopefully you all got it. Basically, I identified, again, a bunch of things that constitute this plan really not going forward tonight anyhow. There's still a lot of things outstanding. For example, Is it okay if I approach, if I come up? Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'll start with what I think is the most important aspect of things here. So, for example, Mr. Novak just explained how, and as well as Andre explained how the changing the water path at the basin in front of the Russell's house is going to cause a problem for Mr. Moore's pond down below. And that could very well kind of be the case. The problem is that if you go to the back of the Russell's home where this pipe discharges, it's actually a wetland. And it's a perennial stream, because if you go out here, I was out here on the weekend, it's the freezing cold weather, that swale actually has active water in it when it's not frozen. So that is the hallmark for a natural spring, and it's that natural springs that actually cause perennial streams to occur. So if you do anything to that area and you stop that natural spring that's there, it will in fact affect wetlands behind the Russell's house as well as that perennial stream. So I realize it might, because of its size, it might not be significant to Mr. Moore's pond, but it is clearly a wetlands issue, big time. I'd like to ask, I know Mr. Andre was out there, and Mr. Novak were out there. Was there a wetland scientist out there with you guys? Okay, so, I mean, this goes to the developer. It's up to him to do his due diligence. There should have been a wetland scientist out there looking at what's in the back of the Russell's yard, as well as what's in this swale. Because again, you're not allowed to impact any wetlands. That's strictly forbidden. With that said, there's another wetlands issue on this plan, which is, I think, this is in the latest version. They actually added an overflow pipe that goes sort of, I don't know, how many thousand feet is it to the brook up and around?
Which hasn't been revised since the last plan. So long as this is all clear. Again, the cul-de-sac here, moving towards the west, southwest, out and along, following Old Worcester Road right away.
So,
Discharges.
so just so the board knows, the fact that they're actually on this particular plan, they are working within 100 feet of the catch basin, which is within the wetlands, 100 feet. That triggers the Mass Wetland regs for a submittal, either an RDA or an NOI with the board. According to the town regs for this type of project, they should have already gone to conservation and submitted these plans for them to review and comment on, which I don't believe has happened. So, getting back to what's going on in front of the Russell's house, there's a couple other things. So for example, this was taken yesterday morning. You can see that the water's still running and into that drainage basin across the street, and that goes down to the perennial stream down below. This is the standing water that wasn't frozen. Okay, it's all along there. So it actually, if you stand up there long enough, unfortunately I did, you can see it actually moving. So again, if you look up natural springs, that is the hallmark for a natural spring. And the entrance to this facility is literally right there. So we also all know what happens when you build near a natural spring, like a road or anything. Mother Nature's a little stronger than construction, and basically what happens is it finds a way to get out there anyway. And in this case, you're going to end up with what you have down the street, which is the water getting out into the road, freezing, and it turns into a safety condition, but it's also, it's really a lot of extra work for our highway department. The other thing that was not on the plans was, and again, it calls for in the regs, is the location of significant trees. And in this particular case, I'd like to point out that this is a big tree around the Russell's house and the neighbor's house, right in front of the drainage. That's a pretty significant tree. It appears to be in the public right of way. So in order for them to do anything with that, it's Mass General law, they have to have a tree hearing, and they have to go through the tree warden in town. And I'm pretty sure, it's not like a slam dunk. It's not like it's something that you can just decide, hey, we're building this building. Most often they say, hey, you can't touch it, you gotta move it. It won't be that tree, that tree as well as other trees, because obviously as you come out, these trees are all along here. They'll be impacted over here, as well as sightline will be impacted. So there are a number of trees. They're supposed to be on the plan so that everybody can see what's going on. Another thing not on the plan is the neighbors, people across the street are abutters. Everybody knows the rules and regs, that you gotta show the abutters properties and, what's going on. In particular, in this case, are the driveways for the abutters, which actually come right up into this intersection. And it's really not fair to the abutter or whoever's buying or lives there not to really see how it all lays out. I mean, quite frankly, the only way to figure out where this is with a sewer manhole. And now there's a drainage manhole and a catch basin, as I pointed it out. So you can't really expect the average neighbor who works all day, is in this line of work, to really pick up on that. Okay, so that's not really fair. So as far as stormwater is concerned, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, Lot A is planning on being commercial property because we're talking about doing a marijuana facility as well as a power plant. So that automatically kicks this project into stormwater management. It's a commercial property or commercial subdivision as far as I can tell, which means you are responsible to provide a stormwater report, which I don't believe was given. And the significance of that is that the stormwater report is going to require the developer to do a number of other things, including infiltration, if you can make it work, TSS removal, which is 80%, temporary suspended solids. All those things would have to be in compliance with the state regs on that. For example, this particular plan is not very, as far as drainage is concerned, it's really not very user-friendly here. For example, the catch basins, it calls for 24-inch RCP pipes, and that's because it's a catch basin with a grade, and they have taken the perimeter drain, which is a pretty big perimeter drain around the circle here, 8-inch, that comes in and it actually goes into the basins. And that's why they need a 24-inch pipe to come out to go to this manhole and then feed this underground detention system. Well, they don't make a trap or a green trap or a hood for a 24-inch pipe. So right off the bat, you're not really getting that 24% TSS removal, 25% TSS removal from those structures. So I guess what I'm saying is it really is not in compliance with any kind of stormwater regs. And as you know, in the town, we strive for that, and that's not happening. They could have reconfigured that so that the basins are typical 8-inch lines coming out to manholes and other manholes for the other. There's other things you could do. So, as far as the stormwater, again, we need to go to Concom. A Concom person that came out here would have told them, what they can do and what they can't do. I believe, the thought process, for example, for this underground, this is a detention system, correct, gentlemen? Okay, so that's a detention system. So the way wetlands and the environment work is that, we go through periods of drought. If we go through a drought, what's going to happen over here is that this system will collect small rainstorms and won't let it out, which will have an actual effect on harming the wetlands. It's not all about, perfectly recreating with a pump system. You really can't. It's only going to kick on when there's a certain level of water in there. So smaller storms are not really going to get and feed that underground spring that feeds that area. Soil borings. I could not find any soil borings that are associated with this project where they count, so to speak. For example, they're up here. There's none in the area of the target area where they're actually going to put this underground storage system, which is extremely deep. So for all we know, it's ledge or worse, it's in groundwater. How do you put that in groundwater? Now what's going to happen is you're going to be pumping groundwater with a pump 24/7, which is a huge problem. Getting into the drainage system. So, number one rule for the town should be never, ever accept a crazy drainage system. I think Mike Andre had mentioned that this is, he has never seen one like this for a regular small subdivision. I would agree with him. However, with that said, no matter what they tell you, and it says it right here in here that this is all gonna get maintained by some lot association or something. Let me tell you from experience what exactly developers do. What they do is that they'll come back here and they'll subdivide this out into separate lots, and they'll put that system on a lot. And then the next step is they don't pay taxes on the lot. So it goes up for tax title. And guess who owns it? Us. And that's what goes on. I've seen that practice. It's a well-known practice in the developers group. Under those circumstances, should the town be accepted a system, a stormwater system or a pump system? I mean, think of this. This pump is 12 feet in a hole. Who's going down there? If you go down there, you've got to bring a crane here to lift that out. You're going to have to bring a propane truck in here to fill the propane for the backup fuel. Who's guarding the propane? We all know propane tanks, what happens over time. Is our highway staff on board with that? It says right in the regs they're supposed to be on board with these things. I can't imagine them saying, yeah, we want to do this. Another big problem with this type of setup, typically, if it was a pond, which is standard, you would still have an access road to go all the way around the pit and the tanks and all those things. Because you know what, it snows, grass grows, all these things, trees grow. You guys have seen it with the landfill. Trees will grow in the landfill. You know, I mean, that's why you have to maintain it every once a year, I think, you said. And here's the last thing on this that's really outrageous, really, is the fact that they have this lengthy overflow pipe system. Well, I mean, if you actually go over here on the street and you look at this, this is going through the middle of a dense forest. So, you know, putting that in is going to be a little bit on the crazy side. Doing all this work down here by the brook, okay, is going to be crazy. But more importantly, it's 10 years from now, when this is all forest again. Who's maintaining that? There's a problem there. How do you get in and maintain it? Those are the things the board has to think about when you're doing projects like this. Typically, there are places that have, you know, infrastructure through locations, but it's usually servicing whole communities. The city of Worcester has, you know, has a few places that go through locations. But let me tell you what happens. They spend a lot of money and time every 5 years going into these things and cutting all the trees down, taking all the brush out. They're not very nice to look at because it looks, you know, it looks like a big opening through the forest. I mean, I guess if you're a dog walker, it's okay. But truth is, huge expense, okay? Is the town prepared to take on those kind of expenses? Pretty sure that's all the information that I have for now. Hopefully that was informative.
Yep,
Yes,
thank you.
Hi, my name is Robert Bougelet, 31 One Station Road. I'd like to say I actually have some questions. I'm coming to these meetings, it's my understanding that this is never going to be built. This is just to freeze the zoning. Is that correct?
The board has to review it like it will be, because once we approve it, it can be, so we
Okay,
have
but,
to.
you know, he was mentioning the greenhouse coming in and doing whatever. If they were actually to do that, they'd have to get your approval to do that, wouldn't they? So this, whatever this plan is, would go out the window.
They, whatever we approve, they can build.
But this is,
Like,
but I
No,
mean,
this would require significant modifications because I would imagine that the stormwater is not calculated with a 1 million square foot building.
No, this
on the
is-
property.
but could they put 2 house lots? They could build 2 houses on it.
If they change the location of the road, the amount of stormwater being generated, any substantial change to the site as depicted on that plan, have to come back for a modification. And the subdivision control law does provide for these plans to be modified. There's a separate section, 81W, that says, come on back if you want to change things.
Looks like I said, basically, this is never gonna be built.
It's not gonna
So all these concerns that are being brought up about water or whatever are not gonna happen.
Well, let's put it this way. If we've done the drainage calculations for that, and it doesn't show a building on it with 1 million square feet,
Right.
it's going to have very different drainage characteristics.
Different entrance, different everything.
Excuse me, Madam Chairman, may I answer the gentleman's questions?
Comment.
So, sir, if you give this approval, basically, they can bond it, and then they can come in and do whatever they want. So for example, if they decided that, hey, you know, there's really good gravel in here, and we need that gravel to build and move to other places, they can come in and hog the whole thing out, and they can, you know, they can have at it. As long as it's bonded, that they say that they're gonna do what's on that plan. So
So
it's
they-
not like you think that, hey, this is just this fantasy thing of, it's for zoning. It gives them the right to do a lot of things, when
They
they
could
get
come in and
approval.
dredge up all the gravel on that without changing the drainage?
There's several cases that talk about gravel removal as a ruse under a subdivision that's been approved by the planning board. There have been a couple of cases where hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of gravel have been stolen under the, well, we're just flattening it out for the subdivision. So it's a fine line between where that ruse begins and where it doesn't.
I've only been to a few of these, you know, and
I
I've
think
seen
one-
the drainage that's been going for 130, 115 years, and now it's a problem.
Yeah. And, taking the gravel, and I think in one case had 800,000 cubic yards that they were taking off the
But if something else was to be built, they'd have to come before this board and
anything
Get
that they
another
haven't
approval.
shown
anything that's not shown on
has
this
to be
plan.
reapproved.
All right, thank you.
Brett Moore, 15 Hammerrock Road. So if I understood, and maybe this is for Mr. Novak, basically, you think about a third of the water that fills that pond comes from those three areas on the map? On this,
Yeah, with the site investigation that I did, I found three major points of water source that meets right at the, basically what is the extended driveway or the common driveway to Mr. Moore's property that has a culvert under it. So it's definitely all channelized and brought to that one point in that outlet. I hope that you would agree or disagree that that one pipe under the driveway feeds the pond. And I followed those three up, and they met the three that I spoke of. Now, there could be more, but that's what I found, so that's why I called it a third.
because I called COMCOM in Boston after we met, the three of us, and asked them some questions, and they talked to me about all these different types of tests. I mean, first test was this dye test, which I have no clue what it is, but I didn't see any dye in my pond. And then, where's the other 2/3 of the water? Did we try to figure that out? Or do we have a clue, or?
Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I apologize if I wasn't clear, there were 3 points. One is obviously the catch basin we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the outlet.
Just on what we saw, I can see what you're talking
Sketch,
about.
actually, that, do you mind?
Just didn't have that one.
Yeah, but it's just, so, orientate myself here. So, here's the site.
Yeah.
Here's the culvert that was in question, 63, 61 meters width. As you can see, it kind of, yeah, this is your driveway, that one culvert. If you recall, we dropped down and we walked. Yep. I'm familiar with all three. Yep, so there was a gentleman at 59. Yep. Invited us into the back and we found another flowing culvert in the back here, which, based on the investigation coming back and forth, they meet up, used to meet up in this main stream. And this main stream is fed through that second channel wetland or through that existing pipe. So one, two,
Okay, so I agree with all
so
that.
that's why I say
There's
another
another
one. Nope, just 1, 2,
So
3.
it's
so I said
third through this one.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Now, thank you. The other thing, and I think I pointed out to both you guys, when my driveway had caved in, the propane tank fell in, the propane truck that fell in. Remember where I showed you where the driveway had been cut, where the pipe broke? in 2005, I think.
Yes.
So that took like a week to fix, and that pond dropped like 10 feet. So, I mean, I know you said you're gonna, you know, it's gonna be a different amount of water and all this, but I'm, like I told everybody here, everybody in this room knows I'm worried about this pond getting screwed up. Or my little creek or river, whatever you wanna call it, I guess it's called a river now. If you saw, you know, I mean, how do we know how much water goes in there each day, how much water's coming out each day? I mean, did we do any of those calculations? I don't even know how to calculate that stuff, but, I mean, God calculated it, and he's done a nice job with it, but the rest of it, I don't know how to figure it out. And if you're gonna slow some of it down, what's gonna happen to my pond?
Madam Chairman, Gerard Russell, 63 Old Worcester
Wait,
Road.
can I let him answer that?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Do you want to answer that question?
I mean, I'll just reiterate real quickly, you know, we modeled pre and post development based on surface flow and through industry standards and modeling. And the reduction, as I stated before, was in volume, I'm not gonna put an adjective on it because everyone will think it's different, but there was, the largest decrease was approximately 18% from existing conditions now to fully developed and everything working. The rate was slower, so in layman's terms, a little less water will get there a little slower, but it will still get there. And again, we're only affecting one of the 3 inlets to that pond. Even though there's one particular inlet from the driveway, there's 3 sources to that. So we're 18% of 3 sources. Is the main reduction. I can't say that we're not affecting it at all. I just can't say that. But I think we're affecting it as minimally as possible, while still meeting your regs.
So there's no other effect on the other 2 inlets?
There shouldn't be, not with this development, no. Because they're fed past all the development, and certainly the furthest one, which is the largest by Elgin Road, there's no work being proposed with this application.
Madam Chairman, just curious about tonight's hearing and what's before you, which is approval of this definitive subdivision plan. And if you were to accept and approve it, wouldn't you be creating a precedence for approval of future projects down the road where the drainage is suspect? That's the question, just curious. Wouldn't it be a precedent for future projects?
I don't know how to answer that. Mark, do you know how to answer that question?
Can you repeat it? I was reading an important case that may come up this evening. Go ahead and ask it again, please.
Just curious about the subdivision plan before the board tonight. If they approve it with the drainage conditions, will they be setting a precedence for future projects on Dresser Hill or wherever else in town with similar types of suspect drainage?
What is the chief objection you have to the drainage?
The pump, running 24/7, and then the town is going to be liable to maintain it at some point?
I don't see any precedent setting involved in that. Every precedent setting is sort of an equal protection argument. You did it to Tom, you did it to Harry, you got to do it to Dick. But the equal protection in bar is a rational basis. It's not a suspect class which deserves strict scrutiny. It's rational basis. So where one situation is A and another situation is B and another situation is C, there's a rational basis for distinguishing those. And the board is not pinned down by what it did in A and have to do it also in B or C.
Okay, I need a diagram for that answer, but I just want to follow up here.
Could've stuck with Tom.
If I were a lawyer like you, I probably would use an argument about precedents in future cases.
Wouldn't work.
Yeah. Second question, and that is, and maybe this, Madam Chairman, is a question also for the attorney. How can your board approve a project which puts water onto my property through an illegal means, really? There is no easement for that pipe.
Is the water entering your property by pipe?
Yes,
So there's a pipe leaving the subject property, coming directly onto your property.
correct. And there is no easement?
Correction. It's leaving the town road. It is not leaving the subject property. The
So-
pipe is in the shoulder of the town road,
That was my
and
understanding.
that pipe has existed since the the early 1900s.
That's my understanding.
No, that's incorrect. That pipe was installed when my home was built, and it was installed by the contractor,
So 32 years ago?
late 80s.
Okay, so it's been there at least 30 years.
And it was installed without an easement. It begins on my neighbor's property at 61, and then diagonally goes across the property line to 63, and dumps on the back of my property. There is no easement.
But the pipe doesn't start on what's labeled here as the project site. The pipe starts on Old Worcester.
Well, there's a connection, I don't know. Obviously, there's a connection under the road to the culvert, where we have this perennial stream.
My understanding was that the drainage leaves the site, the project site, by level spreader onto Old Worcester Road.
It would be into this roadside swale that exists,
Right.
and eventually into this culvert. But the inlet of the culvert that we're talking about, to my knowledge, everything I've seen on the plan where they surveyed it, is in the right of way.
So I don't doubt that there may be a property dispute that you could raise with regard to who has ownership interests in this or that aspect of the drainage facility. But I don't view it as this board's jurisdiction to decide those private property rights. It's not. There's case law out there, and they're very different cases. In Parker versus Black Brook, which I think is cited in somebody's material here, there was a road that was public in nature, but not available to the public for travel purposes. I always liken it to a town road that goes to a well. We're not invited to drive on that. And they showed it as an access way to the subdivision. In that case, the court said that the planning board should look at that, and if it's fatal to the application, it should weigh in and do what they need to do in order to resolve the problem. In other cases, like Holliston Sportsman's Club versus Planning Board of Holliston, the people have come in the audience and said, look, I've got an easement across that piece of property, and they're showing a house on it. Or I've got other rights on the property, and they're ignoring them. And the court has said in those cases clearly that the planning board is not the land court. And when I have to gauge this situation and put it into one camp or the other, I put it into Holliston Sportsman's Club.
Okay? Let me put it another way. Without the pipe that empties onto my property, this drainage plan doesn't work.
It may be that it does, it may be that it doesn't, but it doesn't mean that your property interests in your property bar the discharge of the water onto Old Worcester Road.
So what you're saying is that the catch basin in the road is town infrastructure? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know whose catch basin it is.
I believe it is town infrastructure, we clean it, right?
It sounds to me like your quarrel is with the town.
No, I think that, my point that I'm trying to make is that if you look at the subdivision regs, it says that they actually have to use the town drainage, which they are in effect, because they are discharging into the swale, which goes to the town drainage, because the swale's in the town. So the swale is town drainage, and so they are impacting that manhole, which goes down to Mr. Russell's yard. And I believe the regs do specifically say that you are not allowed to impact anyone's personal property. That's what they say.
I'll look at it again.
That's right.
I don't think they answered my question. I didn't feel like I got my question answered. So if we're going to slow down the water or less volume, is that going to lower my pond 10 inches or 2 feet or not at all? Or I don't think anybody's answered that question. I don't know who to answer.
Gonna try to answer that.
I can't give you that answer right now without a much larger, extensive drainage study of the entire drainage area contributing to that pond. I don't know if things, I don't know if there's anything from other places. I just looked at it from the perspective of this project in particular. And one thing I will mention is that the design that we have does account for groundwater coming through the system, and that will be debated as well. I'm sure that that's a part of what's feeding these ponds as well, which we're not quantifying nor are we limiting, we're just moving it just as an example. So there's a whole lot more to it to be able to tell him a concrete number. I would be able to do that with the study that we've done now, based on just the volume.
With that being said, when I called COMCOM in Boston, they said that the rules are they can't take any water away because it's a pond with a river. It's not vernal or anything like that. If it was vernal, it would be a different thing. They can't take any water away, and they can't add. They need to leave it the way God made it this week. And it sounds to me like they're saying they're going to take away water.
I think the applicant's addressed it a couple times in the Stonewall report. He can speak to it again if he wants about matching pre and post rates and volumes. And I wanted to touch on that again.
So it's really, it's kind of best guess, really, I mean, because you don't know other external factors.
There are certainly going to be more external factors that will be studied, but there's also the idea of meeting the regulations of stormwater versus not affecting the pond. They're not always going to be the same. Most stormwater standards, whether it be the towns or the states, they say equal use. They obviously never say increase, which is something we're not doing, but reduction is allowed, or maybe not allowed, but that's what.
Actually, Mike, in their own regulations, assure that post-development rate of runoff is less than or equal to pre-development. And when we had the last meeting, when we talked about the conditions that we would continue to explore between that meeting and this meeting, the discussion was to keep it level or roughly within 10% less. And that's what we went out and showed. I think it was 8, 12, and what was the other number?
It was 18, but again, I said if we tried to tighten that number up, it increased in another storm. So I couldn't keep that on 10% and still meet the regulations of meet or reduce.
So balancing the different types of storms.
Right, so I had to balance.
Does that change when there's wetlands and a pond involved now? We have basic regulation, you can't increase, you can decrease. Does that affect? And, because I don't.
Well, I think a lot of these matters will be taken up to Concom when they get to the point of applying. They have an outfall near the wetland. It's going to trigger a review for Concom for this subdivision. So ecological impact of that, what they call them, impact on ponds, or project assessment, that it's usually taken up. As far as stormwater management, they've demonstrated what's required by the regs.
I mean, I would point out, I mean, nothing in what we're asking for is a waiver of our obligation to go to conservation. When we file this plan, we file 2 extra copies to go to the Board of Health, and the planning board is supposed to deliver a copy to conservation. Conservation may comment on the effects of the subdivision, and they also may comment on proposals set forth in or associated with the plans. I don't know if the board has received comments from CONSCOM. If they have, I think they would be relevant, but if they haven't, and the 45 days has passed, it's.
I mean, even if they had submitted comments, the plan has changed so much that we would probably get new comments.
Did they? But they never did submit comments, correct? And again,
We did original, I think, was it site plan comments? We didn't.
It was like.
it was on site plan, right? They did not comment on the subdivision plan.
Just came out today. How did we're going to come in and see it?
So typically what happens is my guess would be that the Concom is waiting for them to file an application.
Right.
They have to.
Right.
They're within 100 foot, and it's very clear that the applicant here didn't point out any of these other wetland issues. I mean, the Concom could have looked at this plan, their first couple plans months ago, and didn't see the catch basin and the swale and all that other stuff going on this project because it was missing.
Well, again, we don't have an obligation to get CONSCOM approval before filing the definitive subdivision plan. That's not in your regulations, it's not a requirement. And we can only be held responsible for requirements set forth in the regulations. They have to be understandable by an applicant. Now, 3.3.9 talks about determination of work specs, and it talks about how we have to get written approval if we have any deviations. So if we go to CONSCOM and CONSCOM comes back and says, this doesn't work for the following reasons, you have to make these modifications, well, now we have a deviation, and now, as Attorney Bobrowski pointed out, if we deviate from the plans shown on the subdivision plan, we have to come back and get your approval. But there's not a requirement in your regulations, and that's all we can be held responsible for, requiring us to go to CONSCOM first. In fact, your bylaw contemplates that they're gonna get the plan for the first time when you get it. So,
Speak out.
there, you know, it's speculative arguments at best. We will go to CONSCOM at some point when we're ready to build, and when we do, there is a likelihood that we will have to come back here for deviations.
Which are provided for in the rules. The normal case, the subdivider doesn't want to come back. So if they're building a subdivision of residential homes, they'll go to Concom, they'll go to Planning Board, they'll go to the Board of Health, they'll get all the plans up in the air at the same time. When they finally get everybody to agree that this is the plan that works, they'll shut down with the same plan in place in front of all three boards, done, no problem. But there's nothing, Attorney Rosen is right, there's nothing that requires them to go to the Planning Board first. I'm sorry, to the Concom first. Many developers don't go to the Concom because specifically it raises more issues at the Planning Board and that they don't want to deal with it at this stage. So just deal with it later, and if they have to modify the plans to make them join, that's what they do.
That's not what the reg says. It
Go ahead,
says-
Kristen.
It says mandatory review by the Board of Health and Conservation Commission.
does.
That, the mandatory review by the Board of Health is in the statute, under Chapter 41, Section
It's also
81U.
here.
No, it's
All
in the
plans
town
have to be
bylaw.
referred to the Planning Board within 45 days for their recommendations. So that's a statutory requirement.
It says mandatory review by the Conservation Commission, and then it says, the Conservation Commission shall review the plan and determine the applicability of the Wetlands Protection Act.
That's not a formal application to the Conservation Commission.
It's not an
They're
NOI.
reviewing it, like a peer review board.
Can I look
They're
at
not
it?
acting on an application or requiring that an application be submitted. You might think it's a good idea, but that's not what the reg says.
Okay, so I guess, from my point of view, it's a case where another thing that hasn't been done that's going to affect this project. 'Cause obviously-
Did this get sent to the Conservation Commission for their review?
It has to.
The
Has to go
original
now.
one.
Did you route it to the
The
Concom?
original one was, but we have such, at the last couple of weeks, we had such great turnover. The plan's been changing significantly. I don't think that there's been a recent review of the new setup.
So I guess my point is that the last plan came in last week, on the 9th of January. The Concom board hasn't had 45 days to review it.
Hi, it's Kristen Kasigian, 88 Carroll Hill Road. I wanted to let everybody know, there is a Charlton subdivision regulation in our bylaws online. You can look it up right on the town's website. Regulation 210, 3.3, Section G, which says that the applicant shall obtain mandatory review of this plan by the Board of Health and the Concom, and that is a subdivision regulation on our website. So it may not be the state's regulation, but it is a local regulation, just like all the other regulations they had to look up and follow. I'd like to point out that I sent a letter to the board yesterday, maybe, the day before, with like 18 different places the plan doesn't doesn't meet our bylaws. The first one was that I believe it's an incomplete plan because the Board of Health and the Concom have not been able to weigh in because they keep submitting their plans 3 days before the hearings. So the second thing I'd like to point out is that there is a big safety issue with this whole thing. We have a regulation in section 4.1.5D. On any street at the approach to an intersection, a leveling area shall be provided having not greater than 3/4% grade, blah, 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 for 25 feet. It doesn't exist. There is no leveling area at the intersection.
Let's let a comment.
That would be the one, because they already batted that other one around. So is
as
there a
to-
leveling area?
As to the first comment,
We
again,
already covered it.
they have the right to review it, but that is not an obligation for us to appear in front of those boards, file an NOI, or get any written ruling or determination. If you look at the balance of the section, it basically says they may. It doesn't obligate the CONSCOM to do anything. It says the CONSCOM may comment on the effects of the subdivision. It may comment also on proposals set forth in the associated plans. It is not an affirmative obligation.
But the
to
onus
appear
is
in
on
front-
the applicant. Wait. The onus is on the applicant.
I would challenge you to find one other subdivision plan in this community where the applicant was rejected and told, They couldn't file a subdivision plan because they haven't appeared in front of the Conservation Commission. The onus is on us to deliver 2 extra copies to go to the Board of Health, which we did, and the onus is on the planning board, which you did, to deliver a copy to Conservation Commission for their review.
You're accurate. We usually make it a condition, and then it's at your own risk. And if they turn you down, then
Well, and quite honestly, you don't even have to make it a condition, because if we have to change any specs based on going to them, we have to come back in front of you. And we agree 100%. The only thing we don't agree with is there's no obligation to us to have appeared in front of a board and sought some type of determination. Our obligation ends with submitting the materials.
I'm just pointing out, it's what the bylaw
The
says,
question
so.
number 2 was the 4.1.5, the 75%
The leveling area, yep.
leveling area.
That's a safety requirement at an
So-
intersection?
So we agree. No, we're gonna revise the plans. We could either make it a condition of approval. We've already communicated with Graves Engineering as to how we can meet that standard. And we're gonna submit that revision. And you could either make it a condition of approval, or if you wanted to see that plan before you approved it, we could come back at a date in the near future and show you a plan with that change on it.
I'd like to point out that that's a valid reason for denial, and that we don't have to keep going on with the charade, and that the amount of modifications to any plan, could warrant a reapplication. You don't have to keep accepting like a big ball of snow. You can cut it off and say, okay, at this point, the amount of modifications this totals is a new application.
No,
Just an
that's
option.
incorrect. That's incorrect as a matter of law. 81W is specifically in the subdivision control law to allow the board to modify it on its own nickel if there's something wrong
Well,
with
I agree
it.
they can allow it.
Or the
They don't
applicant
have
to
to.
modify it as they see fit.
But they
It's a
don't
public
have to.
hearing. It's a statutory provision. You can't turn the application away. It's a statutory obligation on the part of this board to hear applications to modify, amend, or rescind subdivision approval under Chapter 41, Section 81.
Forever and ever and ever. It can go on infinity?
Absolutely. There's no obligation on the part of this
It
board.
seems absurd for
Well,
the
read
local
the statute
reasons.
before you make a comment like that. Read the statute.
Keep going.
It's
So again, we'll be making that modification. We've communicated that change with Graves Engineering, and we will submit updated plans showing that modification. If you would like to make it a condition, if you would like us to come back, whatever you prefer, but we are making that modification.
Do you have?
Is this a commercial property or a residential property? Did we get an answer?
It is a non-residential subdivision plan. That's all we have identified. And those are the 2 types of subdivision plans you can file, either residential or non-residential. We have filed a non-residential.
So in the rest of the zoning bylaw, there's residential and then there's commercial. Would non-residential be commercial? Is that the same thing?
Like the agricultural.
Commercial is one type of non-residential, industrial would be another.
Agricultural might be one type.
I would do it by process of elimination. If people aren't living there, it's non-residential.
Okay. So I want to point out one other thing. By not showing any proposed structures, we really don't know what the total surface area of impervious surface is. So how can you even know if the drainage subsystem they're proposing is valid? I mean, if you don't know the rooftop impervious area and you don't know the parking lot impervious area for this commercial subdivision that they just told you they're making, you don't know if that 2,000-gallon underground albatross can even handle the runoff from the roofs and the parking lots.
So the plan we've submitted is for what's existing on the property right now. We are not proposing any change to surface area. We are not proposing any new structures or modifications. And again, under 3.3.9, to the extent we deviate from that design, then we would have to come back and seek a modification to the definitive plan.
So now that we've determined that it's commercial, that means it requires a stormwater.
We haven't determined that it's
Well,
commercial.
Well, so you've determined it's not residential.
Correct.
Therefore, if it's not residential, you require a stormwater report according to the stormwater regs. And so I don't believe that.
This is not the board that has jurisdiction over that. Where is the requirement that if it's a
Says it-
non-residential subdivision, it has to have a stormwater plan approved by
That's
this
the state
planning
law.
board?
That's the state law.
Where does it say that?
That's in the stormwater handbook. Ask Mike Condrey.
But this board does not have jurisdiction over.
It says it in our regs, I believe.
Why wouldn't that be the Conservation Commission?
Excuse me, it goes to both actually. Stormwater management, because some projects only go to planning board and not conservation, and some go to conservation. and
Where
planning
in
board.
the planning board's subdivision rules and regulations does it say that all non-residential subdivisions must submit a stormwater management plan prior to approval of the definitive plan for planning board review?
Where does it say it does?
Because that's the operating body of law here. This is not, hey, let's see what we can grab that's passing by on the breeze. This planning board can only operate within the four corners of its rules and regulations. That's the operative document here.
I'll find it for you.
Madam Chairman, reading from the rules and regulations governing the subdivision of land in Charlton, October 2011, under drainage 5.3.1, the drainage system within the subdivision shall be laid out to the satisfaction of the board, acting on the recommendation of the town engineer, which will require provision of such facilities and arrangement thereof as, in its opinion, are necessary to, section F, create no adverse downstream effects, and section 5.3.4, provision of the adequate disposal of surface water intercepted or collected by catch basins shall be made in such manner that no flow will be conducted over town ways or over the land of others unless an easement in proper form is obtained permitting such drainage. Wondering how this project could comply under these rules and regulations.
Can I just make one point on that? They did submit a stormwater report. There's been several revisions to that. It wasn't the traditional form that maybe this board has seen with the bound document saying stormwater report. It had a cover letter that was in front of it, but Mike could probably show it to you if he has it tonight. There's been several revisions to that. So they have submitted stormwater calculations. Yeah.
Excuse me, I didn't get an answer.
5.3.4.
Oh, it's my turn?
So I think 5.3.4, we're not taking water in catch
I already
basin.
highlighted it, I know what page it's on. So, Mike, 5.3.4,
Right.
hate to cross-examine you at the table here.
So, I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah.
I think to the comment on, they're proposing a stormwater management system. They provided calculations that demonstrate, to my opinion, compliance with DEP. They're not creating any new drainage pathways. The water's going where it always has, into the swale, into the culvert, and they're attenuating their flows to match pre-existing conditions. Excuse me. So, in my opinion, that requirement is met by that paragraph.
So, just to be specific, is there going to be flow conducted over town ways as a result of their stormwater attenuation?
Flow goes through the swale, which is in the town way, and through the culvert. It already does that now. They're not changing that.
How does the swale interact with the pipe?
The swale drains to the pipe.
Drains to the pipe?
Yes.
And the water first goes on to Old Worcester and then it goes into the pipe, is that fair?
Not from the site.
Right, no, I understand this. But it doesn't, so it doesn't go directly from the site into the pipe?
No.
No, when it goes to the swale and then into the pipe, but the swale is part of the town infrastructure.
Foot apart.
Isn't that what it's there for?
But that's town infrastructure, and you're claiming it's not.
You're
When it
claiming
says
that
no flow will be conducted over town ways, what do you interpret that to mean, Mike?
That to me means a traveled way.
Does that mean the road? You don't want sheets of water running down the road, or does it mean the swale,
That's how I would interpret it. I would interpret that to mean a traveled way.
the traveled way?
Say travel way, you're adding order.
Is that way tonight?
That's my opinion. If you ask me my opinion.
And he's our expert.
So I'm left still confused. There's no easement, and according to that regulation, the water from the property is going onto the town property and then onto my property.
But I think the point is that's an existing situation that they aren't changing.
And it's existing, which is illegal because there's no easement on my property.
My point earlier was
I understand,
that
I'm just reiterating my point.
just upon an easement, that's a matter for you to take up with the land court judge, not the board of the planning board of Charles.
But it is something the board should consider since they would be approving this subdivision plan. I think it would be prudent for them to consider that.
That's why we have Mike. What would be the downstream effects of that sheet flow entering onto Old Worcester Road?
So I think there's two other important considerations. The first is, as you read the language of 5.3.4, it talks about adequate disposal of surface water. This isn't disposal of surface water. This is the natural flow of water on a piece of property. Under Massachusetts law, it's something called the reasonable use standard. Water is allowed to flow on natural courses. All we're doing is collecting it upstream and then redispersing it in the same flow and in the same pattern. We are not disposing of any surface water anywhere. It's following its natural flow. Under Massachusetts, the case law and the cases derive out of Tucker versus Bedoyan, and Massachusetts has what's called the reasonable use standard. If we took that flow and we funneled it and channeled it into one point where we were actually disposing of it out onto a street or a way, that would be what this is attempting to address under 5.3.4. But as a matter of law, water has to flow somewhere, and Massachusetts has a standard that dictates that it can follow its natural flow. The second thing is, to the extent that there's any argument that there is an easement, Mr. Russell answered it. Those pipes have been there more than 30 years. Under Massachusetts law, once they've been there for 20, they exist as a matter of law. They are a prescriptive easement in land. If Mr. Russell wants to sue the town and tell the town they need to take the culverts and the pipes out, he may do that. But as a matter of law, those easements already exist. They are prescriptive in nature, they're shown on plans, and by Mr. Russell's own admissions, they've been there more than 30 years, which is a decade more than the 20-year standard.
And we take no position on that here on the planning board. That's not our job. There are lots of arguments about whether that's a prescriptive easement or not, or another type of easement, an easement implied from prior use or an easement by necessity. All of those are unwritten easements, and they have every bit of legitimacy that an express easement would have. But we're not judges. That's a quiet title case.
Hi, Kristen Kassigian again. So I'd just like to point out that at the last hearing, we had this discussion about prescriptive, the town taking things by prescription, and that L. Turner Road didn't fall into that category, even though the town has been plowing and maintaining it for over 20 years. But all of a sudden, the pipe under the road does fall into that category. So I just want to point out the conflicting advice there. And then my question is, we've determined that this is a non-residential subdivision. And according to the Charlton bylaws, section 4.1.4c, all streets serving an industrial or commercial subdivision shall be a minimum of 66 feet width. What is the width proposed on the way? Is it 66 feet?
The width proposed on the way is 60 feet. We believe that a non-residential is not a commercial. However, to the extent that this board believes that a non-residential automatically implies that it is commercial or industrial, we would accept that you condition the plan to increase it from 60 to 66 feet. We also acknowledge and agree that we will prepare revised plans showing it at 66 feet.
I would like to.
We don't, there's two definitions. There are non-residential and there are residential. Commercial and industrial isn't a type of subdivision. We believe the property is an agricultural use. As a result, we believe the 60-foot standard applies. However, if either your town engineer or the board disagrees, again, you can condition a definitive plan. We can correct a definitive plan at your request, and we would be happy to change the plan and add 6 feet to the cul-de-sac.
I would like to point out that inadequacy of a public way is another reason for denial. Thank you.
Fox News.
Yeah, Steve Corona, 17 Old Worcester Road Extension. I mean, I've been to enough of these meetings and I know now we're supposed to have that Men in Black Sharpie pen, that little flashy pen, and forget why we're really here, so I'm not gonna get into that. We all know. My question for Mike is, have you ever seen a rural area like Yorkshire or anywhere in Charlton where you have 98 acres and you still need a high-velocity pumping system to drain the water and it can't do it naturally? 98 acres, that's a lot of way to move water.
I think I've already commented on the system, my opinion on it.
Have you seen one before, though?
I've already commented on that. That's unusual.
Can't you comment again?
I obviously didn't hear it, I would have asked the question.
Mike, you're not aware of a regulation that prohibits you from using a pump, are you?
He commented last week that he's never seen anything like this.
No, the question was more, have you ever seen it in a rural zone? I mean, you see them in downtown Worcester, you see them on Park Ave,
did say it was
like
unusual.
that.
I've said that at a couple of previous hearings, that it's an unusual proposed drainage system. There's no question about that.
And has the board, and again, I'm a little new into this part, but has the board ever approved a plan without a purpose? What's the center of that cul-de-sac? Is it gonna be a swan park or something? Do we even have any idea what's gonna be in there? Because it looks like you're going through spending a lot of money, calling it maybe non-residential, but without a purpose.
The regulations don't require you to state a purpose. You can only regulate based on what's stated in your regulations, and the regulations do not require you to state a purpose.
That's just odd. I mean, I've watched other planning board meetings where they've really gotten down into the details.
Have we had,
Brett, 15 Hammerock Road. But we have stated that we're not quite sure. I think Mr. Novak said that to really know where all the water comes from and how it works, there needed to be some kind of a study done. And we haven't done that test, right? So really, we don't know what's going to happen to my river or my pond at this point. We can guesstimate, but we can't definitively say, correct? So it could dry up. It could dry up. And then, do I have any recourse if it dries up, or if half my wetlands go away, or all my fish die, or? I mean, they're not my fish, they're got, nature's fish, but what's my recourse? I don't.
According to him, you have to sue the town.
I have to sue the town, but you told me I can't sue the board, right? I have no recourse, really.
Under the Tort Claims Act, the board is generally excused if there's even if it's a mistake. So that's the state law.
Well, I would suggest that you err on the side of caution then.
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Yeah, the state.
Do we have any comments from the
Not
highway
now.
department?
Well, he said that last.
Subdivision, the gravel road, the pumping physical water, is that something they need to comment on, or is there a chance that they're gonna have to support that, or is that completely supported by the homeowners association? Should we get some sort of?
I just think that the, kind of like the turnover on the speed, we haven't, I don't think anybody's really had a chance to make a break, is that correct, Jake? Really,
Because of
nobody
the
has.
numbers.
Because, I mean, we've been turning these plans over so fast, with all, these So no one really has had a chance to,
I'd feel more comfortable if they had some input.
Following up your question, is there a way that the town would ever have to maintain this, the pumps?
One thing I'd like to point out is that one of the iterations of the comments which he raised themselves was that he recommended that the pump station, everything be, as much as we possibly could have, the catch basins be moved outside of the right of way, onto the property, or one of the lots, and put in an easement. Therefore, even if by some crazy notion the road ever got accepted, you don't take on the ownership of everything else. And the plans specifically state that everything will be maintained by the lot association, not the owners, not the homeowners, but the lot owners. I feel like that was a legitimate comment that we addressed, and I think it protects the town, but that's just my opinion. And correct me if I'm wrong, we have to apply to have the road accepted.
The approval of a definitive subdivision plan is not an obligation by the town to accept the road. So within the four corners of your rules and regulations, we have taken the mechanical portion of it, put it on private property, have agreed that it would be privately maintained by the owners of the land, the lot owners, and there's no other obligation on what we've submitted on the town. It's, the obligation is remaining with the applicant.
Okay, but as it stands now, we only have one lot. I mean, you have Lot A and Lot B?
Correct,
Okay, that would technically be two lots then.
correct.
And the owner of both of those lots right now?
There would be a lot, there would be a homeowners association, there would be a lot owners association. Both lot owners, and you can make this a condition of the approval, would be required to maintain, would both be jointly and severally required to maintain a pumping station.
If the ownership of the lots changed, does that go along with it?
Running with the land. And you could caveat it that states, even if the town accepts the street, they would not in any way be implied to be accepting the pumping station, that would remain with the lot owners of the land, which is what we have submitted.
Madam Chairman,
So it sounds
so-
good to you, Mark?
Yep.
So my question would be, if there's the drainage in the road, is it gonna work if the system off the road isn't working? Because again, as I mentioned before, there's a whole number of ways to get around, being default on maintaining a system like this and being responsible for it. It's been proven time and time again. Bottom line is that those basins in the road that will prevent that water from washing out the road or going down and impacting the neighbors won't work unless 100% that other system is in place and maintained and working. The cost of that is excessive. I mean, the pump alone is extremely expensive. But just like I mentioned before, to have somebody maintain it, you get to get into another crane. It's significant. It's not a homeowner pump situation. It's very, very significant. To think that a lot owner, is going to maintain it. And again, what happens if they don't maintain it? Let's say they don't maintain it. Now those basins aren't going to work, and now you have a flooding. I mean, just because they say they're going to do something doesn't mean they are going to do it. That would be my point. And you're opening yourself up to it.
So my question would be, where in the regulations does it permit denying an application on the basis that there's a speculation that somewhere out in the distance in the future, somebody's gonna be broke and the pump is gonna break. You would have to deny every single plan that came before this board.
That's not true.
This is very unique than what we normally see, so that's why we're trying to do detailed.
No pumps on my plan.
So the stormwater drainage system is, again, based on the impervious surface on the plan, which, like I said, doesn't adhere to the width of the road required for the subdivision that they've actually requested. So 66 feet is not in the calculation. The 125 feet times 66 feet is not the impervious surface used. It's some lesser thing that they put on there. I'd also like to say, is a commercial or an industrial subdivision allowed on an agricultural lot in Charlton?
Again, this isn't a commercial subdivision.
I'm just asking a question. It's just a
It is a
question.
non-residential subdivision.
But it's a valid
Based upon the fact that agriculture is non-residential, you would have to allow agricultural lots to be the subject of definitive subdivisions.
So they're 5-acre lots then at least.
But
So but you got one that's only one.
80% of our town's resident agricultural lots are.
Hold on.
Because farms aren't 1 acre.
Just because in town, I think we've had this discussion before, when in town you have an R40 or an A60. Just because it is an A zone doesn't mean it's necessarily agricultural. It's
Correct.
residential, the majority of the town is,
Correct.
I think what, 80 or 70% of the town is in
86% or something, like, it's a huge amount.
So that just doesn't necessarily mean it's just straight agriculture and that's it. So
Absolute positivity.
just for correction.
Yeah,
And
our point is, we're not changing any use on the lot. This plan is based solely on what exists on the lot today. And as Attorney Bobrowski stated earlier, and as I reiterated, if and to the extent we go and change the uses or the structures on the property, we would have to come back in and amend this definitive plan under 3.3.9.
Right, but I think what she was getting at is a non-residential subdivision allowed in the A60 residential zone?
Agriculture is non-residential.
But just,
It is in this
but
town.
just getting back to my point of how the town classified it back in 1986 when zoning became established. Is a non-residential subdivision allowed in the residential zoned area?
I don't see why that would not be allowed.
Okay.
Because there are non-agricultural, non-residential uses that are not commercial or industrial. So we don't have to explore whether it's commercial or industrial. I think what everybody is missing is that the legislature, like it or not, has said that if you take the time to change the zoning, and I'm aggrieved by that, I have until the day you vote to submit a preliminary plan and follow it up with a definitive plan, and I can freeze the zoning in effect at the time I did so for 8 years from your endorsement, and the freeze extends to the zoning in effect at that time and the land shown on the plan. That's the biggest freeze we have in Massachusetts. So it's a, make no mistake about it, it's a gift to the development community by your elected officials in the legislature. In the lead case, which is Broken Stone, which I think I've alluded to before, the applicant came in and they showed a subdivision. And they submitted a plan, and ultimately they were denied, and they took their appeal, which told everything. They came back 5 or 6 years later, and they erased all the lines on the plan, and they showed a 359,000 square foot office building on one lot. And the town went nuts and said, that's not the plan you had before. Why do you think that you're not subject to the zoning amendments that occurred after you submitted the plan? And the applicant said, because the statute says that the land on the plan gets the benefit of the freeze. Not the plan gets the benefit of the freeze, the land on the plan gets the benefit of the freeze. And that's exactly what they're doing.
But the plan has to meet the bylaw to be approved.
Yeah, the plan has to meet the bylaw to be approved, but more importantly, it has to meet the subdivision rules and regulations to be approved.
It has to meet the rules.
Yes, and so to the extent it doesn't meet the subdivision rules and regulations, they're in the uncomfortable position of having to apply for a waiver. And I think this board has pretty much made it clear that they're not in the waiver business here. if the plan is to vest rights with a freeze. So that is the conundrum tonight, because there's some things that are not quite up to the subdivision regs, thanks to the sleuthing of people in the audience. And so the board faces the question of, do you want to approve it, but that will probably take waivers? Or do you want to approve it with conditions that say, make the plan that we sign have the following conforming features with each and every rule of the book? Or do you want to disapprove it? I would assume that the applicant would stop me right there and say he wants an extension of time in order to make a new iteration of the plan that comes closer than he is tonight.
The board is obligated to give them that extension.
I wouldn't want to go in front of a judge and say, Judge, we just ran out of patience, when we're at the 90-day mark.
Judge, they had 90 days, and for the first 60 days, nothing was submitted, and we've been meeting, we've been meeting extra meetings. I don't know how many extra meetings, not just on Wednesdays, but on Mondays too, and we're kind of ready. We believe that they had plenty of time to speed it up at the beginning, and now they're.
I'm channeling my inner judge, and it's not working for me. The judge doesn't want this case. The judge wants you to work it out, and if it takes one more meeting, the judge is going to say, you couldn't come back in 2 weeks. That's what the judge is going to say. So they're going to ask for a remand, and the judge is probably going to give it, and you'll be right back.
I've got one more question. And you might have covered this early, because I came a little late, but the plan shows a new road with 2 lots. Both of the lots have frontage on an existing way, Old Worcester Road. So why is this a subdivision? Is this an A&R? What is this? Is it a subdivision? If you can all.
2 lots, each of which has frontage on the road not yet in existence, which can only be constructed under supervision by the planning.
No,
They
And the book.
They actually don't have
frontage.
a sufficient frontage for an A&R on the current road, though.
Yeah.
Mandates them to use A&R procedure.
But why would the town want to take on a new road if you don't have to? But
You're
it's
not
already
taking
there?
on anything, it's a private road.
Oh, I see. It's
It's-
not
they-
immediately a
They don't have to dedicate it, and you don't have to accept it.
I see.
It's a really elaborate shared driveway.
It's a little weird,
Really
And,
elaborate.
I mean, the bottom line is that they're showing the road so that they get the benefit of the freeze, which the legislature provided that I just told you about. There's no mystery here, that's what they're doing.
So, here's the issue that I would tell you as a resident. I mean, we have come to quite a few meetings, sat in here quite, I mean, it's not like it was a one and done thing. These guys have had enormous bites at the apple, as I would say, on this. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, where does that end? Okay, how much wearing down can you do to the residents to keep coming here, reviewing plans? Simple things that these plans missed. I mean, they missed a catch basin in front of the property, okay? Come on, that's really pretty bad. I'm pretty sure, you know, a reasonable judge might, you know, go with it. You know what I mean? I think that, you know, again, how many bites at the apple do you get?
I
They
think,
left it to the last minute. This is a developer, this is what they do. They do this all the time.
who do you think their first witness is gonna be?
Planning board chair.
No. Close.
You?
No, I can't
Oh.
testify.
Thank God.
Who do you think it's gonna be?
The developer.
Mike.
Oh, Mike, okay.
Mike's gonna say there's no waivers required. So the statute says that after this hearing is over, the planning board shall approve, or in the alternative, or if the plan does not comply with the rules and regulations of the planning board, shall modify and approve, or disapprove. So on the first page of Mike's thing, it says, no waivers have been requested with the revised plan.
But then
That's a
since
plan
then,
that is entitled to approval under the
Since then, we
statute.
just
It's not a
discovered
special permit,
that
there's no
that-
discretion.
Mark, but since then, we discovered there's that 25-foot driveway
I get
waiver
that.
that
I get
would be required for the approval of the
I,
plan.
I don't.
And I would make a point. If we're in front of the judge, without picking on your expert, they both missed it. And thanks to the sleuthing, it was picked up, and we're agreeing to correct it in this meeting before you close deliberations. We'll even correct, we'll make the lot less conforming on Old Worcester Road. If it's got too much frontage on Old Worcester Road, we'll bring the frontage back a few feet. There's no condition that we wouldn't accept as to I think there were 3 specific issues tonight. 66 feet of width, 20 feet, 25 feet further back, and if we have to adjust the frontage on Old Worcester Road, we'll adjust that. So while that hearing is still open, in deliberations, we will make those changes, or we will accept those changes as conditions.
And I would prefer, as I would every time, not just in this, that they make the changes, so that we don't have to go looking through a decision for what they were supposed to do, but maybe they didn't do it yet. You want to sign the plan when it's 99% or better, what you think it's supposed to be, not 85% with a bunch of words.
So you're not taking into consideration if the plan is incomplete? If the plan's incomplete, where does that fit into the equation?
Yeah, I don't know how it would be incomplete, all I
They
know.
haven't shown all the wetlands.
Well, I get it. I don't know that that makes it incomplete.
It says it right in your regs, it says it right in the regs, they have to show all that.
There's cases on what's an incomplete plan, and they're pathetic.
Wetlands is a pretty big thing in this.
No, I'm not saying it's not important, I'm just saying that the case law from our appellate courts have said that the threshold for a complete plan is down here, not up here. So my job is to able letting you pay me more money when it goes to court because I gave the board the wrong advice and now I'm making money off it. I don't want to be there. Right? I want the board to understand exactly what the law is and how it operates so that they make an intelligent and rational decision. And this is not a special permit. This is not, could it have been better? What kind of detriment does it have? This is, does it comply with each and every rule in this book? That's the only question. And if it does, and Mike's our guide for that, then their hands are tied. I want you to understand that as a community. Their hands are tied. That's the law. This is not a special permit.
I get that. The little lot, the one that's like 1.4 something acres, does that comply with our non-residential size? I mean, I know farms have to be 5 acres, right? And then what's the commercial lot size? Is it 1 acre?
Well, if it's agricultural.
Well, we have rules, I just don't have them in front of me.
You can have divisions which are not lots. They may be substandard and they're usually labeled parcel.
But that's not the case. They wrote lot on this.
I'm just saying.
I'm just saying that should probably comply with the non-residential lot size.
The minimum is 60,000 square
And
feet.
is that 60,000 or is it 40,000?
It's 60,000.
Okay, thank you.
Then it's a lot.
There you go.
Ken Howard, Old Worcester Road, not to hit this again, Mark, but can they apply for the non-residential if this particular case, it is in 61A still?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
In this case, can they apply to be non-residential if that property is still in 61A?
Well, they're not changing the use of the land now. If they do, that's something down the road. It's entirely under the jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen with advice from the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission. And they'll cross that bridge when they get there. So.
Just 2 questions. Sleuthing. How are we sleuths?
That's not a good thing, not a bad thing.
Is it a good thing?
It's a compliment.
It just sounds derogatory. Okay. My second question. Does the planning board require ever, in certain situations, detailed wetland studies before they approve something?
No, it's not their jurisdiction. It's the Concom's jurisdiction.
I'm really,
We do refer it to conservation, and Todd really does know what he's doing. I just don't think he has reviewed. We just got the plans.
he has limited knowledge.
He just hasn't he hasn't seen the new plans yet.
Yep.
I mean, I can be honest, as far as I know, he hasn't seen those plans yet. And he will have to.
Right, but if you vote tonight without him having had his input, then that whole freeze that the attorney was talking about is in place. Correct?
Yes,
What was the question?
the freeze is, if we approve the plan, the freeze is still in place. And
Even though COMCOM doesn't agree with anything.
Well, with all due respect to the Board of Health and the Conservation Commission, I view the provisions that talk about mandatory review as putting the onus on them to stay in the game. They get copies at the get-go. The Board of Health is in the state law, so they have to get a copy. The CONCOM is in your local regs, so they have to get a copy. They're, this is going on for, I've been here for 3 months, and it's been going on 3 months before I got here.
Yeah, exactly.
So they must know, and they are to take a continuing interest in this, if they have an interest at all. That's the way I view it.
Has
But
COMCOM,
in their defense,
no,
COMCOM has not seen the latest copy.
we haven't given them, no.
Conscom's seen the original plan.
So the
And if
original
you-
plan, this is very different than the original plan.
Yes, to Attorney Bobrowski's point, if you took it such that they had to have 45 days from the final version of anything, you could never close a meeting, because you would close the meeting, then you would have to submit it to them, they would have to have 45 days to sign off, which means you would never get anything done within the time constraints set forth by the law. You submit to them, and the obligation is to submit the original definitive plans as submitted. They didn't comment on the original plans. They could have. The original plans showed many of the same issues that are being discussed right now, including drainage, stormwater, all of the issues that we've been making tweaks and adjustments to the plans over the past 90 days derived from that original set of plans. They,
A lot of wetlands were there was a lot, significant changes, so,
There was a lot that wasn't on the plans.
that are still
Wasn't
not.
the original
Yeah, but now you're into a blame game, and
No, there's no blame game, it's the situation. We've been turning over plans. At the last meeting, we turned over a plan, we got a review and a plan the morning of, and the review, I think the ink was still wet when we were reviewing.
So this is a good time to point out, as a teaching moment on my part, I can't help it, I taught law school for 28 years. Subdivision rules and regulations are fool me once, fool me twice. You should be taking notes. This is broke, this doesn't work. This mandatory review, if the plan changes, we should oblige the applicant to send another copy of the revised plan to the Board of Health and to the Conservation Commission, right through the end of the process. You gotta change your rules to do that. You can only do what your rules allow. So typically when you have a big, folderol like this in an application, you're gonna learn a lot about your subdivision rules and
We're
regulations.
very, very well aware that we need to update everything that we, it's in process, but right now we have to deal with what we have.
Can I clarify something? Our regs don't say that it's up to you guys. I'm looking at them right now, and it's under definitive subdivision plan, and it says mandatory review by the Board of Health and Conservation Commission. And it says, number 1, when the definitive plan is submitted to the planning board, the applicant shall also file blah, 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 2 copies to such and such, another copy to blah, blah, blah. So the onus is on the applicant, not on our board to do all that work. You're not building anything, they are.
Yeah, but that's the initial submit.
No, that's the definitive plan. It's what it says.
It's the initial submittal with the definitive plan to the Board of Health.
Oh, the first copy?
Right.
They've revised it like 50 times.
I know, but the rules don't say every time you revise it, you give them another copy.
But they do.
The point is that the regs control, not what you want it to say.
Well, you guys were saying the way was the public way, when it's the way.
So, Madam Chairman, I have one more thing. I brought this up at the last meeting, and I don't think we got an answer. It says there was an issue with the abatement that was given to this property for the sewer back in 2004 or 5. And it's specifically, they received an abatement on this property for the sewer based on the fact that there was a restriction limiting the property to agricultural use. So, doesn't that mean that if you have, the unrelated use that they're talking about applying for this subdivision project, it doesn't come under that?
I would imagine that's an issue for the assessors to take up when and if this thing goes forward. Or for whoever gave them the abatement, the sewer department abatement.
that's flagged, because I don't want to miss anything like 628 things. I want to just make sure that clearly have that noted.
Sure.
Additional questions?
You know, and back to those comments with Concom, if these plans are coming in and they know you've asked them to go back and do another set, and maybe they've got the original one, the definitive one, they're not gonna take the time to review that and comment on it. If they know, they're watching TV too, they know there's another set coming, and the final set comes the day of the last meeting last week, how could you expect Conservation to even have time to comment on that? This letter is dated today.
I mean,
Mike's
we just
comments,
said that.
and Mike, I'm sure he started to get it done
Our
based on what
rules
they
are
did.
clearly broken, and we need to fix them, but at this point, we have to follow the regs as we have them. But we know.
Madam Chair, I would maybe suggest, there are some changes that need to be done with the plans. I'm not comfortable with approving the plans without seeing the final changes. So if you ask for an extension, our next couple of meetings are pretty booked up. That gives us probably a month from now before we can have another hearing. That would give Concom time to review the latest set.
And Board of Health.
And Board of Health, as long as there's no major changes other than what we're requesting for the current set of plans, that should be sufficient. The next question is, do we ask for an environmental study on the wetlands that do we go that far? And I'm not sure that.
There's so many
Or
issues.
do we leave that up to Concom to review?
I don't know, what do we have authority to do if we want, we really want a more in-depth study of wetlands?
That's conservation.
So
that
if we give that to
Todd can sign off.
if we give that to Todd and Todd looks at it and he feels that that's necessary, then he can provide that feedback to the board.
When you have a community impact study that is allowed as a definitive plan submittal, but I don't think it's designed to address detailed wetlands analysis, sewage disposal, traffic flow, parking, police and fire protection, public works, educational services, water supply and distribution system. Those are the topics of the community impact.
So like, has Highway had a chance to look at this and say that they're gonna, so maybe we need to take that route and have our, since now we're.
So since we're gonna, I assume they're gonna ask for an extension? Is that correct to assume?
Can we get some dates on a calendar that you think you could reasonably either at a regularly scheduled or at a special meeting?
I think you meet on Wednesdays without me, right?
Yeah, this Wednesday, but we've got a full agenda for this Wednesday.
We're meeting
That's way too soon.
7th.
The 16th, and then the next meeting is on the 6th. So it'll be February 20th?
Hold on, let me just look this up, February 20th.
Okay.
No.
February 20th is one of the
That's school vacation.
Yeah.
And I've got
March 6th.
Is there an alternate date that we could get in the interim?
It's not me, I just don't know when they're meeting.
The next date that we don't have a full agenda, and we have what,
We've been
four?
putting a lot off the
Yeah,
past 6 months.
we've been meeting, having a lot of meetings and a lot of late nights, and as much as I love this board, kind of like to see my children.
What did you have in mind?
March 6th.
We have March 6th as an open date.
I'm okay.
The other agendas are absolutely full. And it will definitely give plenty of time to get all of those reviews done and make the plan beautiful, so it can come out of us.
We would like that by February.
Yeah, so, we're we can do it March 6th, but we want time to be able to review and make sure all of our T's are crossed. So we don't want the plans and everything on March 5th. So what, you want to do that now? So
Or you want to go even before then?
Which one's taking us 2 weeks? And then we have time for kids to come, when does come meet?
Wednesdays.
Every Wednesday?
No. Every other.
Every other Wednesday? So
But I guess
that'll
some-
give,
I
so that'll
guess
give
on
COMCOM a Wednesday to take a look at
And
that.
plenty of time for highway and Board of Health and everybody to at least give us a little memo saying they're happy. Yes.
So March 6th?
So March 6th, we would like
Plans
everything.
are by the 20th.
Everything by the 20th. We want the full set so everybody can get, how many, you can define how many sets do we need?
Usually they give 12 and they submit the first time.
It's supposed to be the final set. That's what they just said. It's not non-residential.
Can we take 2 minutes?
Yep. All right, 5-minute break. Thank you.
No, it's a 5-minute break.
If anybody wants Girl Scout cookies, just email me. My daughter, has a really big bowl, so reach out.
Should have voted. Should have voted, she would have had a huge. It's too cold outside.
And if anybody wants Taste of the Towns tickets, we have those too.
This meeting was brought to you by Girl Scout
Yeah, I know. I don't want to fight
It's on the camera. That's it.
That pretty much went out the No, it's not at all.
That's not fresh. We want to have a
No, someone else did, yeah.
Yeah, that was the first one I did. Then there's another one up by the Framingham.
I knew it all. Are you kidding?
Anything good.
Madam Chair, we'd like to propose the following schedule. We would like to submit our revisions to the board by February 1st. We would ask that the board circulate them to any town departments that they believe necessitate comment, Board of Health, Conservation Commission. If you let us know if there are extra copies needed, we would submit them in our package on the 1st. We would then suggest 2 weeks for those departments, to give them until February 15th to comment. We would then like 2 weeks to respond if there were any substantive concerns. That would take us to March 1st. With a proposal for a hearing on Wednesday, March 6th, an extension of the decision deadline until Monday, March 11th.
You guys happy?
So that gives Concom and who else needs to see these?
I believe Concom Board of Health.
They all meet in those 2 weeks. June the 1st and the 15th.
The board should meet, and even if it's, as long as we get a memo, that or whatever.
We send it out to them, and this will become machine learning.
Yeah, can you reach out to those boards and let them know that this is our plan, and they're, we'd love for them to chime in. Just a memo that they will be coming and they'll be getting, by February 1st. And if they could, just get us something back by February 15th. Before the 15th, so, yeah.
I think it's really incumbent upon you to make it very clear to the Concom. This is, we're talking about meeting in that. If they have enough notice, they might be able to jiggle their schedule.
Right, I mean, they have.
I assume these have gone back in front of the ZOE, right? From Curtis? He's looked at these plans? Kurt too? It's Chris here.
Have them chime in.
So why wouldn't the applicant have to apply to Concom? I mean, it's clearly on the plans, they trigger a Concom filing. Why wouldn't the board ask them to proceed with their filing with Concom? And that way, they would definitely get to see it and review it, and then they would be able to ask for all the studies that are necessary. Because right now, you're asking them to review something. And if they're going to say, okay, we're reviewing something, that's not going to give them an opportunity to ask for those studies that we were talking about earlier.
That's what the rules envision. The Concom is being asked to review the plans in a general way for readers. So there's nothing in any state law or local regulation that requires them to go to the Conservation Commission at this stage.
I understand, but at the same token, I believe you just said that it's up to the Concom to ask for the wetland studies that are necessary that the board's looking for. And if they don't apply to them, you're not going to get those studies. And therefore, you're not getting the information that you need.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you can deny the plan because you didn't get the information you needed? And I'm just trying to streamline things here.
I used to, when I wrote zoning a long time ago, I used to say, you gotta go here first and here second. And then I sat through an entire site plan review hearing where the guy spent $50,000 to build the Dunkin' Donuts. And he got his approval because you can't deny site plan. And then he went to the ZBA and he got 1 vote out of 5. There's something wrong with that picture. So he gets to make his choice as to strategy. Might not be the best strategy, might not be the one you agree with, but he gets to make the choice.
I understand, but in other words, the board can't deny it though, based on the fact that they didn't get their environmental study, right?
I don't think the Concom's, I don't think the ask from the Concom is that deep. It's pretty cursory. Give us an overview.
Well, there's a lot of environmental stuff here. You gotta remember, you're gonna impact Mr. Moore's pond. And that's a big thing.
I have no doubt that ultimately the Concom gets all the good stuff, but not necessarily because it got referred there from the planning.
You'll just communicate with and see, he knows what he's doing.
Can deny them for any reason?
They won't?
If they go through Concom, can they deny them
No.
for any reason?
No, not at this stage. If they go through Concom by making an application for Concom, yeah, that's their jurisdiction.
And they will have to do that eventually?
Yeah.
Okay. It's their choice when they want to do it.
Well, the reason why they're holding off on doing it is because if they got a denial, it's all over. They're just gonna get an approval from you, and that saves their zone. That's.
Not necessarily, no. No.
Do they have to get the approval from Concom to make the zoning work?
Chris is zoning, no, right?
They have to get, independently, they have to get Concom approved.
And if
In
they
order to
get
make the
denial,
zoning.
does the site plan?
No, it has nothing to do with the zone.
That's right.
In order to make the alterations to wetland.
So in other words, they don't have to go, they're not gonna go to Concom, why would they? Because it's not gonna deal with the zoning issue that this is
No,
about.
it's the same thing, I have one client ever who went for a groundwater discharge permit while he was doing the zoning because he had 30 feet of sand under his property. Why wouldn't he go? So it's just a strategery on the part of Mr. Rosen, and he'll make the right choice for his client.
I understand. I mean, he's shown a good job for them so far. I hope you guys do this some test pits so we know what's there.
So this will freeze the zoning if the planning board approves on the 6th.
They don't fit in there.
It'll freeze the zoning and then Concom can continue, but the zoning's still frozen for 8 years.
That's from date of endorsement, not from date of approval. They have to sign the plan. That's endorsement.
Okay. So that would include conservation at that point?
No. Conservation has its own regs, it doesn't have anything to do. It does freeze Board of Health regulations as well, but I don't know that that's in the game anyways.
Mark, do we need a written request for
Yes.
extension from the applicant? Okay.
And Michael, if it would just say, extend the time to file the decision with the town clerk and close the business on the 11th.
I took a picture of last time when we did it. I'm just going to write the exact same thing out but change the date.
Good.
Perfect.
And make a motion that we continue this to the public hearing till March 6th?
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
I would appreciate a motion to accept the offer of the applicant to extend the time to file the decision with the town clerk till March 11th, close the business.
So moved.
So I make a motion that we accept the continuance to file the decision to March 11th from the submitter.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.